United Nations and governments on 6 different continents, as well as numerous NGOs, corporations, and universities. He conducts leadership training on finding positive ways to prevent and constructively respond to sexual harassment in the workplace. Mr. Kaufman also wrote the training program on sexual harassment currently being used by staff at the United Nations. He is the author or editor of 6 books on gender issues, and his articles have been published in newspapers, magazines, and journals worldwide. He is the co-founder of the White Ribbon Campaign, the world's largest movement of men and boys working to end violence against women and girls. The movement promotes gender equity, healthy relationships, and a new vision of masculinity to not only improve the lives of women, but also those of men. Please join me in welcoming Michael Kaufman.
Well, I'm really pleased to be here with you today. I hear you've had an incredible day. Is that just a rumor? Is this true? I hope so. Well, I'm talking about men's violence and what we can do to bring it to an end. Now, you'd think that that would make it either a talk that's talking about what monsters men are. But I want to be clear, I'm not here to talk about what monsters men are, because I don't think that men are monsters. Nor do I think that men are a bunch of wolves. But I do think that we've got a real problem out there. We've got a real problem out there with how generations of boys and men have been raised to be men. I think we've got a real problem out there in terms of how that translates into the use of violence. The use of violence by far too many men. Look at the language that I'm using. I'm not referring right there to violent men. Why not? Because I think that most men who use violence in their relationships, who commit wife abuse, who commit sexual assault, who commit sexual harassment at the workplace, are not men that you would just look at and say, oh, he's a violent man. Because those are guys who selectively use violence in their relationships. So we're going to talk about why do some men use violence in their relationships. And equally importantly, why have the majority of men remained silent about the violence? A lot to explore there. But here's the thing. Even though we're talking here today, and in my talk right now, which will be closing out the day, about a horrific problem, it's an epidemic around the whole world. Forms of violence that touch directly or indirectly the lives of every single woman and girl on the planet. You'd think that this talk would be totally depressing. It would be just a total bummer. But the truth is, this is a positive talk. And the reason why it's a positive talk is that when you get down to it, we're not here because of all the violence around the world against women. We're actually here because we're bringing that violence to an end. And that makes this a very positive day. That makes this a positive day because it's not primarily about a problem, but it's about ending a problem. Now, obviously there's lots of different forms of violence. We're focusing on one of them. But of course, most violence in the world is committed by men, either against women or against other men. We know that's true. So, what we need to do, first of all, if we're going to be able to actually leave this room and say, yeah, we can really talk about ending violence against women, we've got to first understand, as deeply as possible, why some men use violence in their relationships. And why that majority of men out there who don't in most countries use that violence, why those men have been silent. We've got to get to the root of the problem of men's violence. Oh, and by the way, just for those I mentioned, I heard social media mentioned, for those who are tweeting, I'm sure you've already figured out the hashtags for these events. So, hashtag CSW, CSW57, and you can do the old VAW, Violence Against Women. You can use those during the week that you're here. Anyone here for 2 weeks? Wow. Traverse. Well, if we're going to be able to confidently say that violence against women is something we can end, we've got to ask that question. Is it something that humans can end? And that goes back to the age-old question. Is violence against women, or for that matter, violence among men, violence against children, is it biological or is it social? That's the big debate. You probably all had, got this chair here already then. You probably all had that debate at one time or another. Is this nature versus nurture? There's some truth in this nature argument, this biological. The truth is that every person, every human being, does have the biological capacity to be violent against other human beings. That's true. That's absolutely true. But my guess is that those of you sitting here are not worried that the people sitting right behind you are going to come at you with, a chainsaw during this talk. Is that true? Right. It's a human possibility, but as we know, it's not going to happen. So it is biological, the violence, that's true. Humans have that ability. Not all species of animals have that ability to be violent against other members of our species. Humans, unfortunately, happen to have that. But here's the thing. The vast majority of us never use that violence. The vast majority of us can be in most situations, like right here, not worried about being attacked. Which tells us something really important. That it's more than just biology. It has to do with something else. A couple years ago, actually 20 years ago now, a couple of clever anthropologists, these are those researchers who look at different human cultures, decided to sift through all the anthropological records, all the studies of different human societies over the past 100 years. And a lot of this research was on different tribal societies, which was really important because it gave us a window into the human past. And they asked one question. They said, in all of those different cultures, has there been violence against women in all of them? Has there been violence among men, violence against children? Because if indeed, they said, yes, it's been in all those cultures, we would not only have to say it's biologically possible, but it's inevitable. If it's everywhere. Here's what they found out. They found out that in about half of the cultures, there was violence. There was violence against women, there was violence among men, violence against children. But in the other half, there was little or no violence. Human possibility, but it wasn't inevitable. They proved that it wasn't inevitable that humans are going to be violent. So then they asked themselves, what distinguishes societies with the violence from those with little or no violence? And the first thing that they discovered was that the societies with the violence were in each and every case male-dominated societies, what we call patriarchal societies. Whereas the societies with little or no violence were societies based on a high degree of equality between the sexes. Now, what do I mean when I say male-dominated society? Let's just look at a few slides here. A male-dominated society is one in which men make more money than women. Right here in the United States and many parts of the world, men make about $1.50, or the equivalent to every dollar that women make. A male-dominated society is one in which men control most levels of government. This is my current favorite picture of men controlling government. This is the North Korean parliament, or whatever they call it. A male-dominated society is one in which most of our leaders, our political leaders, our religious leaders are men. I know I need a new picture. I'm just waiting for the smoke signal. And if you ever want to find, a male leader in the crowd, spot the male leader. Just watch for the guy waving. I don't know what it's long waving. A male-dominated society is one in which we train groups of men, soldiers, warriors, to do what? Well, either to attack other countries, so other societies, other tribes, to take them over, or to defend yourself against being attacked by other male-dominated societies. Not just in the ancient past, as we see with the famous terracotta warriors from China, but very much to this day, as we see with the group of soldiers. A male-dominated society is one in which men run most economies in the world. And let me say, what a great job my half of the species is doing. A male-dominated society is one in which most of our sports heroes are men, even if they've fallen from grace a bit. A male-dominated society is one in which men still tend to be bosses. And this is supposed to be funny. I'm not saying that all male bosses are bad or all women bosses are good. It's just, it's funny. A male-dominated society is one in which men are supposed to lead the way, because women are too frail to lead the way themselves, of course. So men have got to lead the way. A male-dominated society is all these different things. What's the link between that and violence? Well, if we have a society in which we have the power of one group over another, it becomes an invitation to the use of violence. For the simple reason that violence is a really handy means to control another person. I can ask you, could you please do this? Or maybe you'd like to do that? Or could we agree on that? But what happens when you say, no thanks, to be polite? What do I do then? Well, if I have power in society, which doesn't just mean, these guys up on top, but in the household, if the household is defined as, well, I'm the king of the castle, I'm number one, I'm the head of the household, I call the shots, I make the decisions. Ultimately, particularly for some men, the way that they can enforce that is by the use of violence, or the threat of violence. So, I'm sure some of the women here, young and old, have worked, perhaps volunteer or as a job in a women's shelter. Anyone here that has ever worked in a women's shelter? Number of the women. Thank you for the work that you've done. I do appreciate that on behalf of everyone, because women have been the leaders in this work to end violence against women. And so the analysis I'm presenting to you right now is the analysis that's been developed by feminist theorists, scholars, and activists. And what those activists have said, a woman will come into a shelter, and the intake worker will say, when did this happen? And they'll hear the most banal, ridiculous stories. Oh, he hit me because dinner wasn't on time. He hit me because there was a crease in his shirt. He hit me because the kids were loud, on and on. And you're thinking, you got your jaw broken because, the peas were overcooked? And of course, it's not about the peas, it's not about the shirt, it's not about the kids. What it's about is him using violence like a tool. Just like he'd pick up a hammer to hammer in that nail, using violence to maintain his power in that relationship as a tool of control. And that's why the society is based on equality. They said there was little or no violence, because no one was using violence to have power over another group. And it's not just around sex. If we have a society like in South Africa until 20 years ago, the apartheid society, or in the US South until can't remember what years it's, 150 years ago or something, slavery. There you had a minority who happened to have my skin color with power over a majority with darker skin color. How do they maintain that? Well, it's not like, people from Virginia went over to, West Africa and say, hey, you want a great job as a slave? No, of course not. They use violence and the threat of violence to maintain that inequality. So that's the first thing about violence. And one of the central insights made by feminist scholars and activists, that it has to do, that violence is that tool of control. And closely linked to that is the sense of entitlement or privilege that men in a male-dominated society feel that they have. And that's when we think about sexual violence. It's a crime of different things with different causes, but among other things, it's a crime of entitlement. A man feels entitled to have sex with whom he wants, when he wants, how he wants. And as feminist scholars have said over and over again, violence against women happens because we give permission to it. We give permission to the violence. How do we give that permission? Well, we give that permission in different ways. We give permission by not having good laws against violence against women. And yes, we're having better and better laws around the world now. We still have a ways to go. Or we may have laws, but we don't train police to enforce them. We don't train judges to enforce them. We give permission to the violence by celebrating those violent figures in the media. We give permission to the violence. We say it's good. We say it's okay. And perhaps the biggest way we give permission to violence against women, along with violence against children, is that we say it's a personal matter. It's a family matter. Now, I want you to think about that for a second. Because violence against women and children are the only forms of violence that we consider a personal matter or a family matter. They're the only crimes that we consider personal or family stuff. Now, think about that. Think about how bizarre that is. Imagine if you were in an apartment, living right out here, and you were looked across the street and you saw a store being robbed. Who can I pick on? Can I pick on you? What would you do? What are you going to do? You see a store being robbed, you're in your apartment, what are you going to do? You're going to phone the police. Is she right? No. Yay! Duh. But I can tell you, every day, every single day, right here in New York City, across this country, right across the world, people hear a neighbor, a woman being beat up next door. A woman comes into work with a black eye. People see kids being slapped around in the stores, on the street. See women being abused on the street. And do they call the police? Do they say stop? They say no. It's a personal matter. It's a private matter. It's a family matter. I'm not going to get involved. That would be like if I had said to you, you see the store being robbed, and if she had said, what should I do? Should I call the police? No. It's a private matter between the robber and the store owner. Well, you'd say, of course not. But when it comes to violence against women, we've given permission. Now these three things, living in a male-dominated patriarchal society, the sense of privilege and entitlement some men feel they have, the permission we give, have been the core of a feminist analysis of men's violence. And that's something I subscribe to. But I think it gets more complicated. We have to add to that picture. Let me tell you a story. It's a story of the most wonderful moment of my life. I had two kids. One of them is a son, the other is a stepdaughter. So this was the most wonderful moment. It's when my son was born. Now, I'm not being sexist, but the other, as I said, was a stepdaughter. I wasn't there for the birth. The parents didn't invite me. I don't know why. Go figure, right? Anyway, so this is a fantastic moment. There I was. My kid had been born in about 10 seconds. And I didn't yet know. They were in the delivery room. This was years ago. I didn't yet know if it was a boy or a girl. Now, I'm not stupid. I do know the difference between boys and girls. But I didn't know if it was a boy or girl because I had so many tears in my eyes. I couldn't see the little thing. And I mean the little thing, not the little thing. I didn't know if it was a boy or girl until the nurse spoke. And up to this point, she'd been speaking in her normal voice, and suddenly her voice dropped down really deep. She said, "It's a boy. What a strong little fellow." And I was totally shocked. Not because it was a boy. I'd taken high school biology. I kind of figured there was a 50-50 chance of that. But I was shocked by the change in her voice and what she said. And I knew if it had been a girl, her voice would have gone up a notch and she would have said, "You read the script." Absolutely. My kid was 5 seconds old and he was being fitted for his first Green Bay Packers football jersey. And this goes on and on and on. We get systematically treated differently, talked to differently, held differently, spoken to differently. And the reason why this is important, how we hold baby boys and girls differently, dress them, look after them, the toys we buy, whatever it is that most of the growth of our brains doesn't happen before we're born. It doesn't happen when we're in school. 90% of our brain growth happens in our first 3 years. 90%. Every single day, a newborn baby is creating millions of new brain cells, linkages in their brain. They are absorbing the world. They're taking it into their developing brain. And their brains become gendered. Now, I don't mean they become sex. I'm making a really important distinction here. I'm distinguishing between sex, being male or female. Most of us are born pretty clearly male or female. Not all of us, but most of us. But on top of that, we add this layer of what we call gender. And that has to do with our ideas of masculinity and femininity. Our definitions of being a man or being a woman. Our relations of power between the sexes. And it's not just that those are out there in society. They're right there in our brain. We just absorb it into our developing brains. Just like, did any of you do that great experiment in grade 1 or 2 where you take the stick of celery and put it in colored water? Some of you did. You know, our education system is failing us. Anyways, it was the high point of my education. You can still do it. Chop off the bottom, stick celery, put it in colored water, come back in a few days, the celery absorbs the color. Our brains do that. We soak up our society's definitions of masculinity and femininity, and it actually becomes structured into our brains. And we do it just by living. We do it by being, just immersed in this society where gender matters. Here's some more images. Just thinking about boys again here. The toys and the costumes that we buy for our sons, these images of power and strength. And then, of course, when we get older, we become Calvin Klein models, which I have to say is my other job. I'm supposed to do the earlier talk, but I had to do a photo shoot. Or we, we're cowboy, we're old man type, or we just lie on our yacht. Or we lord over a woman on the dock. So all these, we're just bombarded with these images. And if this wasn't bad enough, one of the things that we're doing these days is we're supersizing masculinity. What do I mean by that? Well, I'm going to show you an embarrassing picture. These were my superheroes when I was a kid. Now, it's embarrassing because, of course, these look like flabby, middle-aged guys, which kind of makes me look like a superhero these days, I'd say. But anyway. So, these are my superheroes when I was a kid. Now, here's what you got to know. Even though when you see them, you look at them and you go, superheroes? Probably middle-aged guys. But I want to tell you, these to me were images of invincible masculinity. I could only fantasize about being that powerful. I couldn't pull it off. It was impossible for me to live up to these ideals of manhood. This is what a kid's got to live up to today. If this is impossible, imagine this. And not only the impossible muscles, but look at the difference in expression between these sort of benevolent and goofy looks to this, I'm going to cut your head off. Look. Here's another example. Here's the original G.I. Joe action figure. And here's G.I. Joe in the past decade. For those at the back who can't quite see, here's a pectoral close-up. Here's the original Luke Skywalker action figure from Star Wars. And here is Luke Skywalker after steroids. So you can see we're really bulking up our ideas and ideals of masculinity, in the games that young men and boys play. So this just keeps going on and on. And then in these magazines aimed at older men, of course these guys don't exist. I mean, they exist in a sense. They do look like that, sort of. But to look like that, they work out all day, they take steroids and drugs, they're on special diets. But even then, these pictures get photoshopped. Have you seen that Dove Real Beauty video? If you haven't seen it, Google Dove, like the bird or the soap, Real Beauty. And you see a 30-second video turning just a normal-looking young woman into a billboard fashion model. They do the same for these guys. Now, for my talk for you today, I actually got a hold of the original picture of this guy on the left before he was photoshopped. Do you want to see what he looked like before he was photoshopped? This is incredible. This is him before he was photoshopped. Now, we're just going to keep that picture up for the rest of the... So, where does this leave us? Where does this leave us in terms of thinking about men's violence? I started off by saying, following a feminist analysis of men's violence, which I ascribe to, that some men use violence because we live in a male-dominated society where men have more power than women, and some men will use violence to maintain that power, to maintain that control within their relationships. But I would like to suggest to you, at the exact same time as that's true, men are actually also using violence for the opposite reason. This is a paradox. Both things are true. If we set up these ideas of manhood that no man can live up to. We say to boys as we raise them, you will be strong, you will be tough, you will be in control, you will not cry, you will never hurt, you will never just want to be held and loved, you will be invincible. And we bombard boys with these images. We're saying to boys from young age, you will not be human. So a boy grows up, and he's thinking, oh, I'm just a little boy now, but when I become a man, I'm going to be just tough and strong and have no feelings. I've never had a feeling, by the way, I just want to be clear about that. Oh yeah, we're supposed to have like these enormous penises. That's true, of course. Anyway, so you grow up thinking, you know, I look around and there's all these tough guys out there, but me, I'm just, you know, I'm just this little kid. And you think, as soon as I'm a man, I'm going to be tough and strong and in control. So finally, you know, 12 or 13 or 14 or whatever it is, your voice starts changing and hair starts sprouting, and, you know, you look around at all the other guys, you know, you look at them all, here's a real man, out, here's a real man. But how do you feel inside? And I can tell you how every single man on the planet feels inside. And you feel inside that I must be the only one who's not a real man. Because I still have feelings. Because I'm not always strong and powerful and in control. Because I just want to be loved. I just want to be hugged sometimes. I need to cry sometimes. I must not be a real man. And so what kicks in at this point for young men is this dialogue of self-doubt about making the masculine brave. And that's when boys have to start proving themselves. They start doing it earlier, true. But this is when it becomes most intense. In their adolescence, they have to start proving to the other guys in particular, but also proving to girls, that they are a real man. And yes, they might do it in different ways, but the trump card, the ultimate way of proving you're a real man, is through the use of violence. So we pummel boys. And when they don't fit into that, we make it even worse because we humiliate them. We say to boys, you know, and to men, if you're not tough enough, if you can't take it, you must not be a real man. The coach who says to boys, you know, no pain, no gain. Stop throwing like a girl. This isn't the girls' league. You're playing like a bunch of sissies. On and on and on. All the homophobia, all the stuff that's, you know, it's not about who you want to, who you're attracted to even when we think about homophobia. It's just this gut fear of not being a real man. We bombard boys and men with these images of manhood that none can live up to, and we set up boys and men for failure. We set up boys and men in ways that they become totally obsessed. Totally obsessed. Am I a real man? But of course, it's not about what's in their pants. That's the easy part. Of course, it's what's in their head, their spirit, their whole body, their world. Because no man can live up to these expectations of manhood. And so what happens? Some men then end up using violence, not only to maintain control, but to prove to themselves and to prove to others that they are real men. Isn't this a bizarre paradox? But both things are true. And so with that in mind, let's think about change. Let's think about promoting healthy relationships. Let me share a few thoughts with you. First, about keeping our relationships healthy, for example. So the first thing I think we need to do, if we're going to promote healthy relationships, is that we've got to really fight for gender equality. There's a little book that I co-wrote over the past couple of a year ago, called The Guy's Guide to Feminism. In whatever way we do it, we've got to promote gender equality. In our homes, we've got to be thinking about, if we have brother and sister in the home, do we have equal jobs? Do we have the same opportunities at school? Do we have the same opportunities in our communities? What laws do we need to press for? What do we need to advocate for? We've got to find ways to promote gender equality. Why? Because we know that the ultimate source of violence against women is gender inequality. So working to end violence against women is impossible, ultimately. We can reduce it, but we won't end it without bringing about full gender equality. That's one thing we need to be doing. And many of the women here are doing just that. What else do we need to do? Well, we also have to understand the keys to healthy relationships. And here I'm just talking about in our relationships, how those relationships are defined. That we have got to work hard. We've got to work hard. Why? Because we know that relationships are hard work. And they're not easy. But we've got to base our relationships on respect and honesty. We've all got to learn to be better listeners in our relationships. Listening to words, listening to body language, speaking honestly, taking risks, appropriate risks within relationships. Respecting the other's sexual desires, sexual preferences. Respecting the other, but also respecting ourselves. Because if we don't respect ourselves, it's not going to be a relationship based on equality. And if it's not a relationship based on equality, it's not a relationship. Because a really good, healthy relationship is one between equals, between independent people. You know, we get this garbage in the media about, my other half, my better half, or I can't live without you, type stuff. Do I hear the song? No, I won't. But, endless songs, right? There's endless songs, I'm going to die because I got dumped, type songs. You know what? It feels crappy, but you're not going to die, is the thing. Because the thing is, a good relationship isn't based on melding into one person. It's maintaining our independence, our integrity, and respecting the independence of each other. Those things are all key in terms of building healthy relationships. One of the big things, of course, to make sure our relationships stay healthy is keeping violence out of our relationships. And one important part of doing that is making sure that whatever we're doing sexually, and when I say sexually, I mean whether it's kissing or fooling around with each other or having intercourse or whatever it might be, whatever it is, I'm calling all those things sex in their whole, the manifest possibilities of sex. We have to know what the rules of consent are. Just to share this with you very quickly. What does consent mean? Well, when it comes to sex, whether it's kissing or going all the way, only yes means yes. No means no, but beyond that, yes, it takes a yes to mean yes. The second rule of consent is it's your responsibility to know you have consent. Just like this person here stopped by a cop for speeding, and he says, "Well, officer, how was I supposed to know there was a speed limit?" The officer says, if you're going to be driving, you've got to know the rules. If you're going to be doing anything physically with another person, you've got to know that you've got consent. You've got to talk. You've got to use your words. You've got to find out what the other person wants to do and doesn't want to do. And you've got to share what you want to do and not want to do. The third thing, and this is for those who are not from the U.S., and actually anyone who's under my age, basically, this is going to be a bizarre picture. Does anyone still use that expression, get to the next base? You do? Oh my God. I could have just thrown that in and I would have actually looked like I knew what I was... Anyway, so this idea that first, anyway. The third rule is thou shalt not steal bases. So you may be kissing madly with someone, but that doesn't give the other person permission to stick their hand down your blouse or, give you permission to stick your hand wherever you want to stick it. You might be lying there totally naked with someone. That doesn't give you permission to have intercourse. Every stage in a developing relationship, you've got to have consent. And finally, if you're drunk out of your mind, you cannot give or get consent. Consent is something that can only be given and taken when you are sober. When I see or hear some stories from a guy, pouring the booze to try to, get his date suitably drunk to make the moves, he's basically about to commit rape. So you cannot give or get consent if you do. So those are a few things. But let me focus now on a few things that I'm really excited about. I started off by saying we're here talking about men's violence. And the truth is that women have stood alone for too long. Women spoke out. Women have been speaking out against this violence for decades. But still, women too often are alone. We just see it in this room today. The vast majority of youth delegates, teen delegates, people here are women. I want to thank those women for coming, but I also want to thank the guys. I know there's like a few of you. But we're here, those men who are here, and the men who you're going to see at the different sessions, because we feel that women have had to stand alone for too long, working to end violence against women, providing services for women escaping abusive relationships, pushing for legal reform, pushing for training police and judges, advocating, organizing, providing services. And those things will continue to be important, but women should not have to stand alone. And I'm proud to say that more and more men are now stepping forward and saying that you shouldn't be alone. And when we do it, we don't do this out of some sort of collective guilt or collective blame. We do it out of collective love for the women in our lives. So let me tell you about one campaign that I've been part of. I enjoyed this. It's called the White Ribbon Campaign. It's a couple of White Ribbon campaigns now, but this is the one we started in 1991. So it started just three of us in Canada, where I live, in Toronto, sitting around a table. We didn't have any money. We didn't have any funding. We didn't have an organization. But we were inspired by the women we knew. And we knew there were a lot of good men out there, who were trying to figure out a way to make a difference. So we started this campaign. Within a couple of months, it spread right across Canada. And by the end of last year, it spread to probably about 75 countries. Now, did it spread around the world because we had all this funding? Well, we didn't. We absolutely didn't. For our first 10 years, we had not a cent of government funding, and we wanted it that way. So why did it spread? Well, it spread, of course, because of the impact of the women's movement around the world, but also because there's good men out there. Let me show you some of the fundamental beliefs. We believe that most men don't commit acts of violence against women, but virtually all men have been silent. And through that silence, men have allowed the violence to continue. That's because men control the courts and the parliaments and the religious pulpits. And if men are silent, it means that we're allowing the violence to continue. The White Ribbon Campaign is not an act of collective guilt, but of collective responsibility. The ribbon itself, now I didn't bring ribbons, but I want to show you how easy it is to start a White Ribbon Campaign. There's a piece of paper here, and